Okay, guys. Hi, I'm Miss Howington. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, this is just an open Q&A session. So I have some slides prepared today with just some multiple choice questions. So let's go ahead and get started with those. Make sure you guys check us out on all of the social media. Again, ask questions anytime that you have them. And if you will use the questions down here, that would be great. Can we? So the first question that we have is, can we do a quick synopsis of each of the units? Sure, we can definitely do that. Let's see, I have to remember what they are according to College Board. So I think Unit 1 is what I had in my slides first, and that's on the living world ecosystems. And then, oops. And the next one, and so in the living world in ecosystems, that covers a lot of like food webs and energy transfer through ecosystems, species interactions. Let me click through some of my questions that I had. The biogeochemical cycles, so like the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, different characteristics of biomes. The second unit is the living world biodiversity. So that covers a lot of information on things that impact biodiversity and species distribution, things about ecosystem services, a lot of processes that impact biodiversity, like disturbance and ecological succession. And then the third unit is on population, and that's talking about populations of all different kinds. So both animal populations and human populations. And the live stream that's going to be on April 8th is going to cover some of that specifically, I believe. So like predator-prey interactions, carrying capacities, the age structure diagrams for human populations, the demographic transition, all that kind of stuff. I forget which number we're on here. I think that was the third unit according to the College Board. The Earth systems and resources is the next one. And that covers all of the basic Earth processes. So that includes a lot of like geology, the atmosphere. Let's see what else. Ocean currents, water quality, El Niño, La Niña, wind currents, weather, what's a watershed, why we have seasons, all that kind of stuff there. And so I'm trying to remember the other ones. Yeah, Tanya said she thinks her teacher went out of order. Yeah, I went out of order with my students. So, and I know a lot of other people did the same. Yeah, and I'm looking up the other ones because that's where I stopped and stopped preparing questions for. So let's see. Unit 5 is land and water use. So this is a lot of like mining and agriculture, and what ecological footprints are, and forestry. Unit 6 is energy, resources, and consumption. So all the fossil fuels, all the renewable energy stuff like that. 7 is atmospheric pollution. So all the air pollution, ozone depletion, acid rain, noise pollution, all that stuff. So those are the 7 that are going to be on the exam. And then the 2 that you kind of need to have covered on your own are aquatic and terrestrial pollution. So water pollution, solid waste like garbage and recycling, that sort of thing there. And then Unit 9 is global change, which specifically talks about like ozone depletion, the greenhouse effect, global climate change, and some impacts of that. Okay. Alrighty. So unless you guys have other questions right now, I'm going to jump over to the slides that I had with some multiple choice questions so that we can kind of do a little bit more interaction here. All right. All right. So there is a poll here. So which of the following is considered a major store of carbon in the carbon cycle? Oops. And all of you said the ocean, which is great. So plants such as grass, they don't stick around long enough to really be a store of carbon. Same thing with biomass in animals and algae as well. All right. So there's another great question here, since I said interrupt at any time. So we'll go ahead and answer that. So your question is, do we need to know all the chemical equation stuff? And you need to know some of the more important chemical equations. So let's see. So let me unshare my screen real quickly here. Some of the more important chemical equations that you need to know would be like ozone depletion. Let me see if I can share my paint window here. Okay, so for ozone depletion and ozone formation, naturally you have like your O2 floating around O2, and it will interact with other oxygen that's floating around, and that single oxygen, and that will create ozone in the stratosphere, and that's the good ozone layer that we like. This ozone right here was created from an O2 molecule being hit with UV radiation, and that splits it apart there and allows it to bond with that single O2 molecule. And then in ozone depletion, you'll then have a chlorofluorocarbon, which I believe, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head, yeah, CFC, chlorofluorocarbon. So that a UV molecule will come in and knock apart this bond here. So if you have a CFC plus UV, that releases a lone chlorine molecule. Sorry, my screenwriting is not the best. And then this chlorine, excuse me, this chlorine can then come up and catalyze the reaction and break apart this O3 molecule. So let me see here. So if we have Cl, oh, sorry, plus O3, that's going to break apart and leave us with O2 and O. Some of the other, trying to think of other important chemical reactions that you guys should know. That's one of the more important ones. Generally, you should know the nitrogen cycle itself, but in the past, you haven't had to know any specific chemical equations. You should know the chemical equation for photosynthesis, for the creation of like acid rain from sulfur dioxide, and those sorts of things. And off the top of my head, that's all I'm coming up with. So I'm sorry if I forgot some, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a list of places to start. Okay. And then we have another question from Tanya about that first question the first multiple choice question that I put up. Aren't forests like the Amazon considered other examples of carbon stores? Yes, they are, for sure. When you have really big trees that are very long lived, those are considered sources of carbon store. The soil is considered a store of carbon. Fossil fuels underground would also be considered a store of carbon. Anything that's going to stick around and like stay in its original form for a very long time would be considered a store of carbon. But just because like grasses, they are so short-lived, so a grass doesn't live nearly as long as a tree, then that individual grass might not be, it's not going to store a whole lot of carbon. It might help facilitate carbon being stored in the soil, but not the grass itself. Alrighty. Yeah, so if you guys have some questions, then ask them down here in this questions option so that I can make sure to timestamp the video so that when people are watching it again, then it's very easy for them to see. All right, so we have a questions about terrestrial biomes. And I think your original question was, do we have to know about the climatographs for the biomes? I think you should know how to read a climatograph. So that's those graphs that have both bars, usually for precipitation in an area, and then a line over the top that shows the average monthly temperatures. So yeah, is that all you wanted to know, Danny, about biomes? Let me know in the chats. Okay. So if nobody has other new questions right now, then we'll jump back over to our questions. All right. Our next question is, in a given ecosystem, producers convert 100,000 of In a given ecosystem, producers convert solar energy into 100,000 kilocalories of chemical energy stored in organic compounds. Which of the following is the most likely amount of energy available to tertiary consumers? Yeah. All right. And we got everybody who's voted so far is saying 100 calories. All righty. Anybody else want to chime in? So yeah, that's a great answer. At the so remember the theory of ecological efficiency is that only about 10% of energy from any given trophic level is going to make it up to the next trophic level. 90% of that energy is lost as heat to the universe just from those organisms carrying out their normal processes that they do on a daily basis. So from producer to primary consumer would be about 10,000 kilocalories left. And then from primary consumer to secondary consumer would be about 1,000 kilocalories left. And then from secondary to tertiary, there would only be about 100 kilocalories left. Excellent. All righty. All right, our next question is about the nitrogen cycle. These ones always seem to trip people up. So nitrification is an important step in the nitrogen cycle. In this process, what is happening? Tanya, can you put your random question in the ask questions down below, please? And I will answer that in just a second. Thank you. All right, nobody wants to vote on the nitrogen cycle? Oh, there we go. Got 2 votes. All right, one person thinks it's B, that ammonium is converted into nitrates that can be more easily taken up by plants. And one person thinks that its nitrates are converted into atmospheric nitrogen by soil bacteria. All right, 2 people think it's B now. All right, wait just a second and let anybody else chime in there. All right, 3 people think it's B. All right. Yep. Team B, you guys have it. So C is describing denitrification. Nitrification is when when nitrogen's turned into a form that plants can take up more easily. This first choice A is talking about nitrogen fixation, and D is talking about assimilation. All right, so we have a couple more questions. So I'm gonna unshare my screen, or just make me a little bit bigger, and answer those questions. All right. So back to the climatographs for the biomes. The question is, do we have to know what climatograph refers to what biome? There are no multiple choice questions on the exam this year. So if they're using a climatograph, then they're going to be asking you to interpret data from it. I mean, I think that you should probably know that areas that receive very, very little rain are deserts, and that have like extreme temperature fluctuations. Those are deserts. Areas that receive a lot of rain are probably going to be forests. Areas that are in between are probably going to be grasslands. And then things that are things that experience temperature fluctuations throughout the different seasons. Those are going to be temperate biomes. So you might have a temperate forest that you can see it has warmer temperatures in the summer, cooler in the winter, and has a lot of rain. Oops, sorry, the dog is excited by the mail truck. So, all right. We have another great question. It says, when we have the lab experiment questions, do we have to know when to perform a t-test or an ANOVA test? No, not for APES. Statistics is not a prerequisite for this course. And if your teacher has been having you do that throughout the year, then good for them. But statistics like t-tests and ANOVA tests are not on the APES curriculum. You should probably know when to like take an average of your data or look at the median or that sort of thing, but t-tests and ANOVA tests, no. All right. So this is a question that's referring back to the primary consumer. So, and the energy loss between trophic levels. So when a primary consumer eats a plant, does it get really hot as the energy is lost as heat? So no, it's more heat as just like as living things are living. It doesn't get really hot as like we can sense it, but it is releasing energy. It's more of just like an energy releasing into the atmosphere in general. All right. other question about the biogeochemical cycles. Do we need to memorize the biogeochemical cycles? I would suggest it. It would be a good idea because there are frequently questions that are free response questions that ask you to have a pretty in-depth knowledge of the nitrogen cycle or to be able to compare and contrast the different nutrient cycles. All right. All right, so I think we've worked through all of your questions for now. So we're going to go back to our multiple choice questions and check in with those. All right, our next question is about biomes. So, all right, this biome receives enough rainfall to support the growth of trees. The seasonal changes in temperature lead to numerous deciduous trees losing their leaves in autumn. All right, we have one vote for a tropical forest. Your other choices are a temperate rainforest, a temperate deciduous forest, or a boreal forest. So read the question carefully. It says, this biome receives enough rainfall to support the growth of trees. The seasonal changes in temperature lead to numerous deciduous trees losing their leaves in autumn. All right, most of you have said C. Yeah, which is the correct answer. Remember, temperate means that the area is experiencing seasons, so they're going to have warm temperatures in summer, cool temperatures in the winter, and a spring and a fall. Yep. All right. Next question here. Hopefully you can see all of that table there. All right, so based on the information in the table, which of the following organisms are exhibiting competition with each other? So take a second and examine that table and see if you can figure out which organisms are competing with each other. All right, we have 3 votes for D so far. So shrews and spiders are both, according to this chart, the consumer shrews and spiders are both eating grasshoppers. Your other option for organisms that were competing with each other would have been hawks and snakes, but that's not one of your answer choices. So since they are going after the same food source, that's how we know that they're competing with each other. All right. All right. Remember to keep asking your questions. When you're asking a question, make sure that you type it down in the Ask a Question section. All right, I gave you a lot to read for this one. So we're going to read this passage and then we'll have a question on it on the next slide. I'll go ahead and put the poll up so that you can think about the questions there. All righty. All right, so bull trout use a bewildering array of strategies to aid in their survival, from remaining in streams their whole lives, like rainbow trout, to spending part of their lives in the ocean before returning to streams to spawn, just as salmon do. But trout are present in only one of 2 neighboring rivers in the Olympic Peninsula, Washington State. And in this one, the Elwha River, where 2 large dams were removed. Dam removal resulted in massive outflow of sediments, reducing the clarity of the water and also building up a large delta and expanding the size of the estuary at the mouth of the Elwha River. Sampling for bull trout before, during, and after the dam removal was used to detect whether bull trout changed their use of the Elwha River estuary or moved into an adjacent creek, the Salt Creek stream, where they were formerly absent. Sampling revealed no movement into Salt Creek, but numbers of bull trout in the Elwha River estuary greatly increased. during and immediately after dam removal, coinciding with a large sediment outflow, before returning to their original low levels. Thus, bull trout appear to have used the enlarged estuary as a refuge from the effect of dam removal and then returning to the river when the river water was cleared up from sediment. Of additional interest is the long-term response of bull trout to the additional habitat that opened up above the former dams. All right, so your question is, gauging from the response of the bull trout immediately after the dam removal on the Elwha Dam, what is most likely a trend in the biodiversity of the river that was seen? So is it A, a significant increase in biodiversity due to improved water quality? B, biodiversity would remain the same because species could not leave? C, a temporary decrease in biodiversity due to decreased water quality? Or D, a shift in the species found but constant biodiversity measures? So what do you guys think is the best answer there? It's a lot of information. Oh, all right. So remember that the article said that the trout went downstream to the estuary and relocated immediately after the dam removal and during the dam removal. So this is indicating that probably there were other species who might have been sensitive to that pollution that would have relocated temporarily, but as soon as the sediment settled, they probably would have returned. So the correct answer to this is C. So whoever our one brave soul who said C is, great job. All right, our next question is about ecosystem services. So which of the following is a regulating ecosystem service provided by coastal salt marshes? Is it A, absorbing floodwaters associated with rising sea levels? B, providing sheltered habitat for young organisms? C, recreational spaces for activities such as kayaking are created? Or D, marsh grasses can be harvested and converted into biofuels. Remember, we're looking for a regulating ecosystem service. All right, most people seem to have picked A on this one. So absorbing floodwaters associated with rising sea levels. Yep, that would definitely be a regulating ecosystem service because it's kind of mitigating a process there. All right. Our next question is about Mount St. Helens. Yep, and you guys can't see all of my answer choices there either. Okay, so we have a graph here. The Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption occurred in 1980. The graph shows the total number of plant species found in the area before and after the eruption since about 1983. What process has been occurring? So here around 1983, we started to see an increase in the number of species after a really sharp decline in the number of species. Your answer choices are A, ecological resilience, B, pioneer species, C, I have no idea what I wrote there, but it's not the right answer, so don't pick C, or D, ecological succession. So A, ecological resilience, B, pioneer species, or D, ecological succession. All right, you guys have overwhelmingly picked D. Excellent. You are very smart cookies. All righty. Our next question is about wildfires. So which of the following would most likely result from deforestation of large areas of forest due to widespread wildfires, such as the campfires in California or the bushfires in Australia? So A, increased ozone thinning because of the release of chlorofluorocarbons. B, decreased acid rain because of the sequestration of sulfur dioxide. C, increased global temperatures because of the release of carbon dioxide, or D, decreased evaporation because of the loss of tree canopy. All right, I'll give everybody just a second to answer. Make sure you're reading your answer choices very carefully. All right, most people pick C, and that is the better answer. D is not entirely incorrect, but it's not as good of an answer as C is. So I wrote this question, not anybody associated with the College Board. So we'll chalk that one up to my question writing. All right, we have a question. Will they ask whether it's primary or secondary succession? Yeah, so there is a good chance that you could be asked to differentiate between primary and secondary succession. So when that is the case, so remember, primary succession is when, so first of all, ecological succession is the predictable change in an ecosystem, specifically in the plant community of an ecosystem over time. So it's when like an ecosystem starts to be colonized by pioneer species, so like lichens and mosses, and then like small grasses and shrubs and flowering plants tend to grow after that, and then larger shrubby things tend to grow, and then quick growing trees will come in, like pine trees a lot of time, and then a mixed hardwood forest would be the last stage in succession. But there are some ecosystems that thrive on disturbance and that stay and that don't follow that whole entire path of succession. Yeah. So, I mean, in theory, yeah, you could be asked to identify primary and secondary. So primary succession is when that whole process starts out and there's absolutely no soil to begin with at all. And you have to go through the soil formation process with the lichens and the mosses excreting acids and breaking down the rock into sediments and that sort of thing. And then secondary succession is when there is already soil existing. So maybe from like a fire. And in the case of Mount St. Helens, it was kind of an interesting volcanic eruption. Well, not interesting. It was an ashy volcanic eruption. And so there was, the soil was not destroyed. It was just covered up by ash. So there were a lot of plants that actually survived that and that were able to come back from there. But in other volcanic eruptions, like in the Kilauea eruption on Hawaii, that's kind of like an oozy lava and keeps happening, that's covering everything in igneous rock. And so that succession is having to start out from primary succession, no soil at all. All right. And we have another question here about why do biomes with high biodiversity, why can biomes with high biodiversity resist environmental change than biomes with low biodiversity? That's a great question. So in areas with high biodiversity, you have lots of different kinds of species, and a lot of times those species are going to kind of overlap in what their niche is. So you might have like 5 different organisms that are decomposers, and that's a very important role in an ecosystem, or 20 different kinds of producers. And so if some sort of natural disaster happens and 1 or 2 of those species are wiped out, then in areas with high biodiversity, then there's a lot higher of a chance that there's going to be another organism already there that can come in and fill that role. All right. All right, keep the good questions coming, you guys. These are great. I'm going to jump back over to my questions until you guys come up with some others. Maybe if my mouse wants to work. There we go. All right, keep them coming. All right, so we're going to move on to the unit on population. So raccoons eat a variety of foods and can live in a variety of habitats, including near humans. Koalas eat only eucalyptus leaves and live only in coastal Australian forests. Which of the following terms, I'll put up my poll question for you guys, which of the following terms best describes these two species? All right, here we go. So raccoons are predators and koalas are prey. Raccoons are decomposers and koalas are scavengers. C, raccoons are K-selected species and koalas are R-selected species. Or D, raccoons are generalist and koalas are specialists. All right. Okay, so I think most people, everybody has said D, raccoons are generalist and koalas are specialists. Yeah, raccoons are the poster animals for generalist species. They can live pretty much everywhere. So they are very not picky, and specialists usually need very, very specific situations to live in. There was a second where somebody was debating about K-selected and R-selected species. So remember that K-selected species, they tend to be much larger in size, and they tend to have very few offspring at a time. They give a lot of care to their individual offspring. They tend to like wait until they tend to need a lot longer in their lifetime to mature before they can start having offspring. And so I like to think of K for kangaroo, because kangaroos are big species that only have one or two joeys at a time. And they give a lot of parental care, because I mean, can you give more parental care than carrying them around in a pouch all the time? And then our selected species tend to be things that are smaller in body mass. They reproduce very quickly. They have tons and tons of offspring. And yeah, so I like to think of R for roaches and rodents, because those things are reproducing very, very quickly. All right. Our next question is based on the graph above, which is the best estimate of carrying capacity of the wolf population? So is it 30, 1,500, 50, or I think 2,500 is the other option for D. So A, 30, B, 1,500, C, 50, D, 2,500. So which of the following is the best estimate of carrying capacity for the wolf population? All right, so if we look at this graph, we see over here that we need to be looking over at the left y-axis to look for the number of wolves. And our solid line is the wolf population. All right, so we have a lot of votes for A and a lot of votes for B. All right, so if we look at this solid line, it tends to bounce around right in here a lot. And so our best answer choice is probably going to be 30 for that, because our options are either 30 or 50 over here on the wolf population size. So A is probably our best answer for that. The dotted line and this right axis shows us the number of moose. But the question is asking about the wolf carrying capacity. I would say 1,500 is probably about the moose carrying capacity. Yeah, so just make sure that we're reading questions very, very carefully, and reading graphs very, very carefully. Remember, a lot of the free response questions are moving towards a lot of data interpretation, either from reading passages or from graphs, and a lot of calculation questions, especially since they're trying to craft questions that are harder to plagiarize. There's going to be my personal guess, from my experience in looking at the AP questions for several years, is that there's probably going to be several math questions on this. So be careful with that stuff. All right. Our next question is which of the following characteristics is most closely associated with a country that demonstrates the age structure diagram shown above? So is it A, a high percentage of the population has access to quality food supplies? B, there is a low population growth rate? C, there is a high infant mortality and child mortality rate? That's not what I wanted. And I'm not sure what D is because it's all covered up, but I think you can pick a correct answer from those three. Clearly, I need to think about where that silly black bar is going to be. All right. Most of you picked C, which is excellent. So if we look at this age structure diagram, you can see down here in this very first bar on the bottom, that's our 0 to 4-year-old in the population. And you can see there's a big jump between the numbers of 0 to 4-year-olds to 5 to 9-year-olds. So that, and infant mortality is when the death, looking at the deaths of children younger than 1, and child mortality is looking at the death rate of children younger than 5. All right. Okay, so we have a question here about endemic and specialist species. So are endemic species and specialist species the same? No, they are not. So endemic species are species that are found in a certain area, that are like native to a certain area and naturally occurring there. Specialist species, I mean, so endemic species can all species, endemic specialist species just have like a very small range of conditions that they can tolerate and that they thrive in. So they might have like a very specialized diet. So like in that previous question, koalas only eat eucalyptus. Or they might be like, for some reason, I'm thinking of Asian species now that I'm talking about koalas now, and like pandas only eat a very specialized diet. They also are very picky about their mates. So generalist species are more likely to become invasive species or non-native species and survive that. So hopefully that answers your question, Danny. All righty. We will head back over to the multiple choice questions. All right. Next question is all right, so a country currently has a crude birth rate of 40 and a crude death rate of 10. In 1950, the crude death rate was 40. In 1970, the crude death rate was 30. In 1990, the crude death rate was, was 20. Which of the following statements best explains why the country has a declining death rate? So option A, the country is currently in stage 1 of the demographic transition and infant mortality is high because of poor sanitation. B, the country is currently in stage 2 of the demographic transition and the life expectancy has increased due to improvements in access to food. C, the country is currently in stage 3 of the demographic transition and women are becoming educated, putting off having children until they become older. Or D, the country is currently in stage 4 of the demographic transition and the death rate is rising above the birth rate. So which one of those is the best answer? So we have a country that has a declining death rate. Which one of those answer choices best explains why the death rate might be declining? All right, we have 5 votes for B, no votes for anything else. I feel like I did not write a properly tricky enough question for you guys. Or maybe you guys are just so smart. Yeah, so we're talking about declining death rates. So answer choice A would lead to an increase in death rates. B, improvements in food and in sanitation are always going to decrease death rates. C has to do with birth rates, not death rates. And D would be a declining death rate, or sorry, an increasing death rate. So it's obviously not that one. Great. All right. Remember, keep asking your questions down below. We have about like 9 more minutes, 8 more minutes here. We'll go through a couple more of mine if you guys don't have any. All right. So the San Andreas Fault in California is a transform fault. The movement of the Pacific and North American plates here frequently result in earthquakes. At which site in the diagram is transform plate motion most likely happening? Is it position A? So you have this plate moving this way, and it looks like there's a gap here. Is it position B? It looks like plate 2 seems to be sliding under this part in plate 1 maybe. Position 3, where plate 2 is moving this way and plate 3 is moving this way. Or position D, where is just up here in the middle of plate 1, looks like. All right, so we have 3 votes so far for C. Anybody else want to chime in? 4 votes for C. All right, once again, you guys are correct. Remember that transform motion is when 2 plates are sliding past each other in parallel but opposite directions. If you had converging plates, they would be moving together. At convergent boundaries, you can have subduction happen where one plate slides under the other. You could have orographic lifting happen when the 2 plates kind of smash up together. And then a divergent plate boundary, you have plates spreading apart from each other. And that generally results in things like rift valleys or the mid-Atlantic ridge. All right, we got some questions here. All right, will there be a lot of demographic transition questions? Well, your guess is probably as good as mine as to what is going to be on the exam. Demographic transition questions have frequently been on the exam in the past, but who knows? I mean, they're asking you 2 free response questions, so they're probably going to try to cover as broad of a range of topics as they can in one question, but I can't tell you other than that there have been a fair number of demographic transition questions, both in multiple choice form as well as on past free response questions. So hopefully that's a good enough answer. All right, can I explain all of the types of plate movements and what is caused when collided with each other? Yeah, so I think I already kind of started to do that. Going back to the transform plate boundaries, which is when the plates are sliding past each other in opposite directions, but they're still parallel to each other. That tends to result in just a lot of earthquakes. You might be able to see a fault line there, but there's not really a lot of significant landforms that are created there. When you have the 2 convergent plates, if you have a subduction zone, so one plate sliding under the other, you can get trenches. So right where the plates slide, when one plate slides under the other, it forms a really deep trench right there. So like the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest place in the ocean that we know of, is created by one ocean plate sliding under the other. At subduction boundaries, you can also get volcanic chains. So like the Andes Mountains and the Marianas Islands are both island chains or volcanic chains. Marianas Islands happen to be islands that have volcanoes or were created by volcanoes at these areas. So as the one plate slides under the other, that extra magma that's being added to the area under crust kind of like builds up a lot of pressure. And so it eventually is going to need to be released somewhere. So I like to think of it like adding water to a water balloon. So eventually that water is going to pop the balloon. So like eventually that extra magma being added into that same spot is going to need to be released. If you have two convergent plates and they are butting up together, then you can get mountain creation. So like the Himalayan mountains are created by the Indian subcontinent pushing into the Asian boundary or the Asian plate. And Tanya is correct. So divergent boundaries that are two plates sliding apart, they create rifts. So like the Great Rift Valley in Africa is two plates sliding apart. And it's the Mid-Atlantic Ridge that's being formed between the Atlantic and European plate, which I feel like is a confusing name, but you have the two plates sliding apart from each other. And because the crust is really weak on either side there, you get a lot of volcanoes popping up underwater there. And so you do have like a little bit of a ridge running down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And there's a really deep valley in between that. So the name is a little bit throwing there. All right. So keep the questions coming, guys. We have like 2 more minutes. So if you guys have any last questions, then I would love to answer them. So make sure to ask in the questions below there. And while you are thinking of those, we'll do really quickly one more question here. So students want to determine the impact of soil erosion from a local farm to the north of their school. They plan to collect and identify species of aquatic insect larvae living in a stream on their school campus just to the south of the farm, keeping account of those that are sensitive to water pollution and those that are tolerant of pollution. The stream runs from north to south, so it's running from the farm to their school. Which of the following would be a good site to sample as a control? So the upstream of the farm, so north of the farm, the stream segment adjacent to the farm, the stream segment south of both the school and the farm, or the stream segment adjacent to the school. All right. Yeah, you guys have all picked A, so great work there. So if they want to study the impact of the farm itself, and they're collecting insects downstream of the farm, that's their study site. And so if they're collecting upstream of the farm where the farm's impacts on the stream are not going to reach those organisms, that's a great place to study. All right. Oops. Okay, so thank you guys so much for spending an hour with me. You guys had really great questions. Does anybody have any last minute questions that I can answer? All right. So remember, oh, we got one last question. Can I explain El Nino? Okay, oh, goodness gracious. All right. That's a tall order. All right, explain El Nino. Here we go. So I'm going to unshare this and share another screen. Okay, so if we have here, all right, here's our dotted line. That is the equator. Here is South America. Here is Australia. So normally, the wind currents are blowing from South America to Australia along the equator. These are the south equatorial winds. So as this is happening, it's kind of pushing all of this warm water that the sun has heated up on the surface of the on the surface of the ocean over here to Australia. So, and if you guys remember, then if warm water is near a body of, or is near a land mass, then that's going to result in a warm, humid climate because all of that warm water can really evaporate pretty easily. And I am still showing you lots of me and not a lot of this map here that I'm trying to look at. Okay, let's try again. So we have winds blowing the warm waters from South America to Australia. And so this warm water over here is generally causing fairly wet, humid, warm climates, normal conditions. And then over here, this warm water is being pushed out of the way, and that's leaving room for cold water from Antarctica to come up, and also cold water from the deep waters here to come up. And when it's coming up, it's also bringing with it lots and lots of nutrients, which is really great for aquatic ecosystems and like food webs and fisheries. So the fisheries here are usually very, very strong. But that cold water that's welling up here results in a pretty cool, cool compared to like other places at the equator, dry climate here. So during El Nino, these south equatorial winds, they basically just stop blowing and they weaken a lot. And so if you guys can think of like, if you were blowing a fan on a bucket of water, as soon as you turn off the fan, all that water is going to slosh back. So all the water, all the warm water kind of sloshes back and fills back in. And so you have warm water now here along this western coast of South America that results in a change in the weather here pretty significantly. And so it becomes much warmer and wetter here, and they tend to get rains that their climate is not used to. So that can result in a lot of flooding. Also, since the warm water is just sitting here now along the coast of Peru and Chile, then that cold water with all the nutrients in it from deep down in the ocean can't well up. And so those nutrients don't get brought into the ecosystem. And so the fisheries, the aquatic food webs there, the marine food webs there tend to suffer a lot. And so since you don't have all of this warm, wet air being blown over here to Australia and Papua New Guinea, they tend to experience droughts during El Nino. During La Nina, it's basically an intensification of the normal conditions. So we have that south equatorial air current and water current is blowing the water and the wind very strongly towards Papua New Guinea and Australia. And that's when they're getting lots of heavy rains that they're not used to, that are heavier than what they're used to. So they can get a lot of flooding there. And Ecuador, Peru, Chile, they experience a lot drier climates than normal. All right. So thank you guys so much for your time. And hopefully I will see you guys again on another live stream. I hope you guys are all hanging in there with all of our crazy situations. All right. Bye, guys.